How can I sandbox Python in pure Python? I'm developing a web game in pure Python, and want some simple scripting available to allow for more dynamic game content. Game content can be added live by privileged users. It would be nice if the scripting language could be Python. However, it can't run with access to the environment the game runs on, since a malicious user could wreak havoc, which would be bad. Is it possible to run sandboxed Python in pure Python? Update: in fact, since true Python support would be way overkill, a simple scripting language with Pythonic syntax would be perfect. If there aren't any Pythonic script interpreters, are there any other open source script interpreters written in pure Python that I could use? The requirements are support for variables, basic conditionals and function calls, not definitions.
This is really non-trivial. There are two ways to sandbox Python. One is to create a restricted environment, i.e., very few globals, etc., and exec your code inside this environment. This is what Mesa is suggesting. It's nice, but there are lots of ways to break out of the sandbox and create trouble. There was a thread about this on Python Dev a year ago or so, in which people did things from catching exceptions and poking at internal state to break out to bytecode manipulation. This is the way to go if you want a complete language. The other way is to parse the code and then use the as module to kick out constructs you don't want. For example, import statements, function calls, etc., and then to compile the rest. This is the way to go if you want to use Python as a config language, etc. Another way, which might not work for you since you're using A, is the PyPy sandbox. While I haven't used it myself, word on the intertubes is that it's the only real sandbox Python out there. Based on your description of the requirements are support for variables, basic conditionals and function calls, not definitions. You might want to evaluate approach 2 and kick out everything else from the code. It's a little tricky but doable.
Roughly 10 years after the original question, Python 3.8.0 comes with auditing. Can it help? Let's limit the discussion to hard drive writing for simplicity, and see. So far exec could easily write to disk. But we can forbid it at will, so that no wicked user can access the disk from the code supplied to exec. Pythonic modules like NumPy or Pickle eventually use the Python's file access, so they are banned from disk write, too. External program calls have been explicitly disabled, too. An attempt of removing the lot from within exec seems to be futile, since the auditing hook uses a different copy of locals that is not accessible for the code ran by exec. Please prove me wrong. Of course, the top-level code can enable file I/O again. Sandboxing within Python has proven extremely hard, and many previous attempts have failed. This approach is also not entirely secure, for example for public web access. Perhaps hypothetical compiled modules that use DirectOS calls cannot be audited by Python. Whitelisting the safe pure Pythonic modules is recommended. Definitely there is still the possibility of crashing or overloading the Python interpreter. Maybe there remain even some loopholes to write the files on the hard drive, too. But I could not use any of the usual sandbox evasion tricks to write a single byte. We can say the attack surface of Python ecosystem reduces to rather a narrow list of events to be disallowed. This URL. I would be thankful to anybody pointing me to the flaws of this approach. Edit. So this is not safe either. I am very thankful to @emu for his clever hack using exception catching and introspection. I guess that auditing plus subprocessing is the way to go, but do not use it on production machines. This URL.
As far as I know, it is possible to run a code in a completely isolated environment. But in such environments you can do almost nothing. Smile, you cannot even import a module, but still a malicious user can run an infinite recursion or cause running out of memory. Probably you would want to add some modules that will be the interface to your game engine.
I'm not sure why nobody mentions this, but Zopay 2 has a thing called Python script, which is exactly that, restricted Python executed in a sandbox, without any access to file system, with access to other Zopay objects controlled by Zopay security machinery, with imports limited to a safe subset. Zopay in general is pretty safe, so I would imagine there are no known or obvious ways to break out of the sandbox. I'm not sure how exactly Python scripts are implemented, but the feature was around since like year 2000. And here's the magic behind Python scripts, with detailed documentation. This URL, it even looks like it doesn't have any dependencies on Zopay, so can be used standalone. Note that this is not for safely running arbitrary Python code. Most of the random scripts will fail on first import or file access, but rather for using Python for limited scripting within a Python application. This answer is from my comment to a question closed as a duplicate of this one. Python from Python, restricting functionality?
Foundation, not resources